Let me ask you something. Do you believe you know a villain when you see one? We live in a world that loves to draw lines in the sand, to label people as good or evil, especially when they're powerful. But here is a hard truth, a belief I hold strongly. The monster in the story is often just the hero of a chapter you haven't read yet. What if everything you thought you knew about someone was a carefully constructed lie? And what if you, by accident, were the only person on earth who could uncover the heartbreaking truth? This is a story for anyone who has ever felt judged from the outside, or who has found a secret connection in the most unexpected of places. We're about to dive deep into a story that proves a counterintuitive but powerful point sometimes. The greatest betrayals are the ones we commit against ourselves. It begins with a premise that sounds like a modern fairy tale with a vicious twist. A recluse king hires a helper, a kind-hearted young woman named Elena Watson who desperately needs the job. The king is Stephen Marshall, a mysterious, silent billionaire who the world has painted as a monster. But here is the unbelievable part. While working in his cold, empty mansion, she falls hard for the critic who trashes him daily online, a passionate, anonymous writer who has become her secret soulmate. This isn't just a love story, it's an emotional minefield. We have Elena, a woman with a heart full of empathy, caught between two worlds. In her real life, she serves a man she believes to be a cold-hearted tyrant. Online, she's falling for the charming, intellectual hero who has sworn to bring that very tyrant down. The curiosity is almost painful, isn't it? She's walking the tightrope, and on either side is a man who holds a piece of her future. The quick reward, I can promise you, is that the resolution to this conflict is a plot twist so shocking, it will change the way you see everyone in this story. So we have two captivating figures: Elena Watson, our relatable and compassionate helper, searching for connection in a lonely world. And we have Stephen Marshall, the enigmatic recluse king, a man so shrouded in mystery and public hatred that no one knows the truth of why he locked himself away. The event that brings them together is a simple job contract, but what it sets in motion is a collision of secrets, lies, and a destiny that will force a man's most guarded secrets to be unmasked. What happens when the man she works for begins to show glimmers of a broken heart, contradicting everything her online love says about him? And what will she do when she is forced to choose between the man she's falling for and the man she's sworn to serve? This story will take you on a journey of emotional discovery, betrayal, and ultimately, a heart-aching quest for redemption. Before we dive in, help us build our community of story lovers. Let us know in the comments what beautiful city you're watching from. Right now we want to know how far our stories are reaching. And if you believe in the power of a good story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a chapter. And please, share this with someone you think will be as touched by this journey as we are. You know, it's funny how life works sometimes. What feels like the end of the road is actually just a sharp turn toward your true destiny. For Elena Watson, that turning point was an employment ad that seemed too strange to be real. It wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline, a chance to prove her worth. She was to be a personal helper for a man nobody ever saw, a ghost in the machine of high finance. Little did she know, this wasn't just about organizing a schedule, it was about stepping into the heart of a modern-day fairy tale, a truly heart-aching story waiting to unfold. They called him the Recluse King, a modern-day Howard Hughes, a billionaire who had everything and yet chose nothing but solitude. Stephen Marshall was a legend whispered in boardrooms, a phantom whose empire grew while he remained invisible. His reasons were his own, locked away behind the iron gates of a sprawling, silent estate. The world saw a monster of industry, a cold enigma. But every king, even a recluse, needs someone to manage the castle. And the universe, in its infinite wisdom, chose Elena for the role. But here is the kicker, the delicious irony that sets our stage. By night, away from her new responsibilities, Elena had a secret of her own. She was utterly captivated by an online writer, a secret critic whose words were like fire. This anonymous warrior of justice wrote with a passion that made her soul sing, dedicating his platform to exposing the perceived evils of one man, Stephen Marshall. It was an odd sort of love story to be falling for the words of a man who was her new boss's greatest enemy. She'd spend hours scrolling through his scathing articles, nodding in agreement with his sharp intellect and seemingly righteous anger. He painted a picture of a ruthless tycoon, a man devoid of feeling, and she bought every word. His crusade felt noble, a brave stand against unchecked power. This online persona was everything she admired: bold, intelligent, and fiercely protective of the little guy. An emotional connection was forming with this digital phantom, a man whose secret identity was as guarded as Stephen's. It's a classic case of seeing what you want to see, isn't it? She saw a hero in the Critic, a digital knight fighting a dragon. The Critic's narrative was so compelling that it became her truth, shaping her perception of the man she was about to meet. The constant talk of betrayal and corporate greed from the Critic's blog prepared her to meet a villain. She was bracing herself for the cold, hard reality of working for a monster, all while her heart fluttered for the man trying to slay him. So with a heart divided, she drove through those colossal gates for the first time. On one hand, she carried the professional resolve of Elena Watson, the new helper. On the other, she held the secret affection for a ghost who despised the very ground she was about to walk on. She was walking into the lion's den, completely unaware that the lion, the hunter, and the entire jungle were far more complicated than she could ever imagine. The stage was set for a plot twist of epic proportions. Stepping inside the Marshall mansion was like entering a museum after hours. Everything was breathtakingly beautiful, impeccably clean, and utterly lifeless. The silence was the loudest thing in the house, a testament to the hollow world of the Recluse king. Sunlight streamed through colossal windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, the only lively things in sight. It was a gilded cage, a grand and lonely monument built by a billionaire who seemed to have misplaced his own soul somewhere within its marble halls. This was the kingdom Elena Watson was now paid to inhabit. When she finally met Stephen Marshall, it was an anticlimax wrapped in disappointment. He was a shadow, a fleeting presence with eyes that looked right through her. His instructions were curt, his demeanor as cold as the statues in his garden. There was no flicker of warmth, no hint of humanity. She was just another cog in the machine of his isolation. He treated his new helper not as a person, but as a function, a tool to maintain the sterile perfection of his self-imposed prison, a world where no genuine connection could possibly survive. Well, what did she expect? The man was everything the secret critic had described. This cold, distant phantom confirmed every scathing article she had read and cherished. In a strange way, his behavior was a comfort, validating her secret digital life. The critic was right about Stephen Marshall, and this realization only deepened her admiration for the anonymous writer. The love story in her mind was with the man who fought this monster, not the one who signed her paychecks. This initial encounter felt like a clear sign of where her loyalty should lie. The days bled into a sterile routine, a silent dance of duty and avoidance. Elena organized his life with a quiet efficiency that was never acknowledged. Instructions would appear on a tablet, tasks to be completed in a house where the only feedback was the continued, deafening silence. It was an emotional wasteland, designed to keep the world at arm's length. She was a ghost tending to a ghost, and the profound loneliness of the place began to seep into her bones, making her question her own resilience and destiny. Yet, Elena refused to be broken by the emptiness. She poured her heart into her work, finding a strange sense of purpose in bringing a semblance of life to the sterile environment. She was more than just an employee. She was a silent force of order and care in a world defined by chaos and neglect. This quiet overcoming of the oppressive atmosphere was a testament to her spirit. She was determined to be the best helper she could be, even if her efforts were seemingly invisible to the Recluse King himself. Each night, she would retreat to her small, comfortable quarters, the only space in the mansion that felt truly hers. There, shed open her laptop, her portal, to a world that felt more real and vibrant than her own. The words of the secret critic were her sanctuary, a beacon of passion in the cold silence. Tonight, however, reading wasn't enough. She felt a deep urge to connect, to be heard. With a trembling finger, she began to type a response, a message, to the man who seemed to be the only one who truly understood. It started with a single comment, a few lines of appreciation for his latest article. To her absolute surprise, he replied. It wasn't a generic, automated response, but a thoughtful, personal message. Suddenly, the secret critic wasn't just an icon on a screen, he was a real person, and he was talking to her. Elena Watson felt a jolt of connection so powerful, it almost scared her. His intellect wasn't just sharp, it was magnetic, pulling her into a conversation that felt more stimulating than any she'd had in years. Their correspondence quickly blossomed into a daily ritual. They'd debate his articles, discuss philosophy, and share small, anonymous details about their lives. He was witty, charming, and his passion for justice was intoxicating. This hidden, digital relationship became the most vibrant part of her life, a secret garden she tended to in the dead of night. She was falling, and falling hard for the mind of a man whose entire purpose was to dismantle the empire of her employer. The irony was as thick as the tension in that silent house. This burgeoning online love story was a dangerous game, a tightrope walk over a canyon of conflicting loyalties. Every compliment she gave the critic felt like a small act of betrayal against the man who, for all his coldness, provided her livelihood. Yet, she couldn't stop. The emotional nourishment she received from these exchanges was too addictive. He made her feel seen, heard, and understood in a way the silent, imposing figure of Stephen Marshall never could. His secret identity only added to the allure, making it all feel like a fated clandestine romance. He never asked for her name, nor she for his. They existed in this perfect intellectual bubble, known only by their usernames. He called her Sparrow for her quick wit, and she simply knew him as Veritas, the seeker of truth. This anonymity created a safe space for honesty, a place where they could be their most authentic selves without the baggage of the real world. Little did she know that this digital truth was built upon a foundation that was about to be shaken by a staggering plot twist, one that would challenge everything she believed. In his messages, Veritas was relentless in his pursuit of the Recluse King. He saw Stephen Marshall as the embodiment of corporate evil, a soulless machine of a man. Elena, armed with her daily experiences of a cold and distant boss, found herself agreeing with him, even feeding him small, impersonal details about the mansion's oppressive atmosphere. She was becoming an unwitting informant in a war she didn't fully understand, driven by a connection that felt more real than reality itself. This was a heart-aching connection built on a shared enemy. As their bond deepened, she began to feel a sense of shared purpose with Veritas. They were two souls pushing back against a world of cold indifference, represented by the very man she worked for. Her admiration for him grew with every word they exchanged, solidifying his place as the hero of her story. But as she typed her next message, a faint sound from downstairs reminded her of the other man in this equation's silent, enigmatic figure who was completely oblivious to the secret rebellion happening under his own roof. The shift was so subtle, she almost missed it. It began not with words, but with actions. One afternoon, while she was replacing some wilted flowers in the grand hallway, she stumbled, sending a heavy vase crashing to the floor. Bracing for the cold reprimand she was sure would come, she looked up to see Stephen Marshall rushing over. He didn't say a word about the mess. Instead, His first and only question was a quiet, "Are you hurt?" For a split second, the recluse king was gone, replaced by a man filled with genuine concern. These moments began to accumulate, like stray puzzle pieces that didn't fit the picture the secret critic had so convincingly painted. She noticed him leaving a fresh cup of tea on her workstation on mornings when she looked tired. She once caught a glimpse of him through a half-open study door, sketching in a notebook with an expression of such intense, heart-aching concentration and sadness that it made her breath catch. This wasn't the monster from the articles. This was someone far more complex, someone hiding a deep well of pain. Slowly, painstakingly, a new image of Stephen began to form in her mind. He was still distant, yes, but she started to see it less as coldness and more as a shield. His vast, empty mansion felt less like a palace of arrogance and more like a fortress built to protect a wounded heart. The public narrative, the one Veritas championed, felt increasingly one-dimensional. Elena, his trusted helper, was now the sole audience to a side of this billionaire that the world knew nothing about, a side that hinted at a past tragedy. This created an unsettling turmoil within her. How could the man who showed these flashes of quiet kindness be the same soulless tycoon Veritas described? Her nightly chats, once a source of comfort and validation, were now tinged with a confusing guilt. The man she was falling for online was dedicated to destroying a man she was beginning to understand. This wasn't a simple case of good versus evil. It was a messy, emotional tangle that pulled her in two different directions, a prelude to a significant plot twist. She started to see the world through a new lens, one that questioned everything. The overcoming wasn't just about surviving the lonely mansion anymore. It was about navigating the treacherous landscape of her own perceptions. The stark black and white narrative was bleeding into shades of gray. She was caught between two powerful forces: the passionate, righteous anger of the critic and the silent, wounded vulnerability of the man he targeted. Her destiny seemed to be interwoven with both of them in a way she couldn't yet comprehend. One evening, after finding a rare, out-of-print book she had once mentioned enjoying left silently on her desk, she logged on to chat with Veritas. His words, usually a source of comfort, now felt jarring. He was on another tirade about Marshall's latest business acquisition, painting him as a predator. Elena stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, a profound sense of conflict brewing within her. The two worlds she inhabited were on a collision course, and she was standing right at the point of impact. Just as Elena began to see the man behind the myth, the secret critic launched his most vicious campaign. Yet, the articles became more personal, more cutting, digging into rumors and twisting facts until they resembled weapons. Each post felt like a physical blow, and she found herself flinching on Stephen's behalf. The hero she had admired from afar was now waging a war that felt cruel and unjust. Veritas's passionate crusade was starting to look more like a personal vendetta, and it made her deeply uncomfortable. Her nightly conversations with him became a minefield. She'd try to steer the topic away from Stephen Marshall, but his obsession was all-consuming. Had asked for her opinion, for any scrap of insight into the recluse king's psyche, and shed off her vague, non-committal answers. The guilt was eating her alive. This secret correspondence, once her greatest joy, now felt like a profound betrayal. She was lying to a man she was falling for, all while protecting a man she was supposed to despise. It was an impossible, emotional trap. Her loyalty, once so clearly aligned with the critic, was now fractured. She saw firsthand how the attacks affected Stephen. He grew even more withdrawn, the shield around him becoming thicker, more impenetrable. She saw the flicker of pain in his eyes when a headline was particularly nasty. As his helper, her instinct was to protect him, to ease his burden, a feeling that was in direct opposition to her connection with Veritas. Her heart was staging a civil war, and she had no idea which side to root for. This internal conflict was exhausting. She adored the witty, intelligent man on her screen, the one who shared his dreams with her under the cloak of anonymity. That budding love story felt real and powerful. But she was also developing a fierce, protective loyalty to the quiet, wounded man she worked for. She was the only one who saw his hidden kindness, the only one who knew the caricature painted by the critic was a lie. A great surprise was how deeply she had come to care for her reclusive boss. She was living a double life, torn between two identities. Online, she was Sparrow, the intelligent confidant to a crusading journalist. In the mansion, she was Elena Watson, the silent guardian of a misunderstood man's peace. The pressure to choose, to reconcile these two halves of her life, was immense. She felt as though a great plot twist was imminent, a reckoning that would force her to confront the consequences of her divided heart and the secrets she was keeping from both men. One night, Veritas sent her a message that made her blood run cold. He claimed to have found a source, someone who would leak a devastating secret from Stephen's past, a secret that would ruin him completely. He was ecstatic, believing this was the final blow in his righteous war. Elena stared at the message, her heart pounding with dread. She knew, with absolute certainty, that she couldn't let this happen. The time for passive observation was over. She had to intervene. The crisis arrived without warning, as they always do. A sudden power outage, triggered by a violent storm, plunged the entire estate into darkness and silence. The backup generators failed, 9 million fluke, and the sophisticated security system began to blare, its alarms echoing through the vast, empty halls. It was chaos, a situation that would send most people into a panic. But in that moment of pure mayhem, Elena Watson became a beacon of calm. She didn't freeze, she acted. While the skeleton staff ran around in confusion, Elena, armed with only the flashlight on her phone, moved with purpose. She manually deactivated the shrieking alarms, located the emergency breaker box using old blueprints she'd studied out of sheer curiosity, and calmly began directing the others. Her voice was steady, her instructions clear. She was no longer just a helper, she was a leader, a steady hand in the heart of the storm. Her competence was a quiet, undeniable force in the darkness. From the shadows of the upper landing, Recluse King watched her. Stephen Marshall saw her coordinate everything, her calm presence single-handedly preventing a major disaster. For the first time, he wasn't looking at an employee, he was seeing a person of incredible strength and grace. Under pressure, in her unwavering focus, he saw a resilience he hadn't encountered in years. It was a surprise that left him speechless, a quiet admiration blooming in the wreckage of his carefully controlled environment. When the immediate chaos subsided, she found him standing by a window, staring out at the raging storm. She brought him a lantern and a warm blanket, simple gestures of care. He finally looked at her, truly looked at her, and the mask of the cold billionaire slipped. "Thank you," he said, the words soft but heavy with a meaning that went far beyond the events of the night. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition. In that single heart-aching moment, the first crack appeared in the emotional armor he had worn for a decade. This event shifted the very foundation of their dynamic. The invisible wall between them, once a mile thick, now had a door. He started to see her not as a function, but as a partner in maintaining his sanctuary. Her quick thinking had done more than just solve a crisis. It had shown him that he had allowed someone capable and trustworthy into his isolated world. It was the beginning of a potential redemption for the man who had pushed everyone away. A slow turn towards the light. The storm outside raged on, but inside the mansion, a different kind of storm had just passed. A fragile calm settled between them, a silent understanding that something profound had changed. As Elena finally went to her room, exhausted but oddly exhilarated, she forgot all about the critic and his online war. A new, more immediate reality was taking shape right in front of her. A reality that hinted at the possibility of overcoming the loneliness that had defined both of their lives. The crack in his armor, once formed, began to widen. It didn't happen overnight, but in small, quiet moments that felt more significant than any grand declaration. Stephen Marshall began to seek out Elena's company, not for work, but for the simple, profound comfort of presence. They would sit in the vast library, not speaking for hours, just sharing the silence. It was a language all its own, a silent conversation between two lonely souls that felt more emotional than any spoken words. One rainy afternoon, as they sat by the fire, he finally broke the silence that had shrouded his past for so long. He spoke of a time before he was the Recluse king, a time when he was just a man in love, on the cusp of a brilliant future with a woman who was his entire world. His voice was thick with a pain that was still raw, still bleeding, even after all these years. He wasn't just telling a story, he was entrusting her with the broken pieces of his heart. He told her about the accident, a tragic public event that the media had twisted into a narrative of his own recklessness, a story of betrayal by the very press he once courted. They painted him as a villain in his own tragedy, taking not only the love of his life, but also his reputation and his faith in humanity. He didn't retreat from the world out of arrogance, he retreated out of a grief so profound, so all-consuming, that the silence of the mansion was the only place he could still breathe. The secret critic's attacks were salt in a wound that never healed. Hearing the truth from him was a revelation for Elena Watson. The cold, distant billionaire was gone, replaced by a man shattered by loss. This confession wasn't just a story, it was the key to understanding everything about him. It was a heart-aching moment of pure vulnerability, a plea for someone to finally see the real man behind the headlines. As his helper, she had organized his present now. She was becoming the keeper of his past, a responsibility she felt deep in her soul. This confession was the ultimate plot twist in her understanding of him. The monster was a myth, the villain was a victim, and the man she was falling for online, Veritas, was unknowingly tormenting a man who had already been through hell. The weight of her own secret correspondence, her own unwitting complicity in his pain, came crashing down on her. Her destiny was now impossibly tangled with this man's quest for peace and his public tormentor. She listened, offering not pity, but a quiet, unwavering empathy. She didn't try to fix him or offer empty platitudes. She simply sat with him in his pain, acknowledging its depth and validity. In that moment of shared vulnerability, a bond was forged that transcended their roles of employer and employee. It was a connection born of truth and compassion, a fragile seed of hope that suggested a path toward redemption and healing was, for the first time, actually possible. Just as her world inside the mansion was spinning with truth and empathy, her digital world decided to make a bold leap into reality. Veritas, the secret critic, had become completely enchanted by Sparrow. He was captivated by her intellect, her surprising defense of nuanced thinking, and the compassion she showed even for his sworn enemy. He felt a connection with her that he couldn't ignore, an emotional pull that demanded something more than just words on a screen. The secret online love story was about to face its ultimate test. One evening, a message from him popped up that was different from all the others. It was direct, hopeful, and terrifying. "I feel like I know you better than anyone," he wrote, "and yet I don't know you at all. I have to meet you, Sparrow. I need to see the person behind the words." The request hung there on the screen, a digital gauntlet thrown down. It was the moment she had both dreamed of and dreaded, a call to bring her secret identity out of the shadows and into the light of day. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Meet him? How could she possibly do that? Her worlds were on a collision course, and this meeting would be the point of impact. To meet Veritas would be to choose a side, to solidify an allegiance that her heart was no longer sure of. It would mean looking the man she thought she loved in the eyes, while carrying the secrets of the man she now felt a duty to protect. The idea of such a face encounter felt like the ultimate betrayal of Stephen Marshall. The proposition forced a painful internal reckoning. Who was she more loyal to? The charismatic, anonymous writer who had captured her mind, or the wounded, vulnerable man who had finally trusted her with his soul? Both men held a piece of her heart, and the thought of choosing one over the other was agonizing. This was no longer a game or a secret escape, it was a real-life dilemma with profound consequences. A surprise turn she never anticipated when she first typed that innocent comment. She agonized over her reply for hours, typing and deleting countless drafts. Saying yes felt like a betrayal of Stephen. Saying no felt like a rejection of a connection that had brought her so much joy and intellectual companionship. It was a classic catch-22, a crossroads that would define her path forward. Her carefully compartmentalized life was about to collapse, and she feared the fallout would be devastating for everyone involved, especially herself. This was an overcoming of a different sort of battle within her own conscience. Finally, with a deep breath, she typed a response. She told him she was flattered, that she felt the connection too, but that her life was complicated. She asked for time, a gentle deflection that was neither a yes nor a no. But she knew she couldn't solve forever. Veritas was not a man who waited patiently on the sidelines. The request had been made, the seed planted. Sooner or later, she would have to face the man behind the keyboard and confront the truth of her own divided heart. The tipping point came during a discussion about a new, particularly cruel article Veritas had published. He was gloating, convinced he had exposed the Recluse king as a heartless manipulator in a recent business deal. He described Stephen Marshall with such acidic certainty, such absolute conviction of his evil, that something inside Elena finally snapped. She had stayed silent for too long, her complicity a heavy weight on her conscience. Tonight, she couldn't do it anymore. "Maybe you're wrong about him," she typed, her fingers flying across the keyboard, fueled by a sudden fierce need to speak the truth. "Maybe he's not the monster you paint him to be. Maybe he's just a man who has been through unimaginable pain and is doing his best to survive it." It was the first time she had ever directly challenged him, the first time Sparrow had shown her talons. The digital silence that followed her message was deafening. Veritas was stunned into a rare moment of speechlessness. His charming, agreeable Sparrow was suddenly defending his arch-nemesis. His response, when it finally came, was sharp and defensive. "You don't know him," he shot back. "You're romanticizing a ruthless billionaire." But Elena pushed back, armed not with corporate facts, but with human truths. She spoke of compassion, of the danger of judging a life from the outside, of the stories people carry that no headline can ever capture. This wasn't just a debate, it was the first real rift in their perfect digital world. For the first time, he saw a side of her that wasn't just in sync with him, and he didn't like it. His black and white worldview had no room for the shades of gray she was introducing. The conversation became tense, strained. The easy, flirty banter that had defined their love story was replaced by a palpable friction. This challenge to his core belief was a plot twist he never saw coming in their relationship. The argument ended without resolution, leaving a sour taste in both their mouths. Elena felt a strange mix of terror and relief. She had finally stood up for what she now believed to be true, but she feared she had shattered the beautiful, fragile connection she had with Veritas. It felt like a betrayal of their bond, yet staying silent would have been a far greater betrayal. Of Stephen, and of herself. It was a lonely, difficult stand to take. As she logged off, an unsettling quiet filled her room. The rift with Veritas was painful, a deep schism in the most emotional relationship she had. But in defending the tormented man who was her boss, she realized something profound. Her loyalty was no longer divided. It had, without her even noticing, shifted entirely. She now stood, albeit secretly, with the Recluse King. The consequences of that shift, she knew, were just beginning to unfold. Inside the dimly lit study of the vast mansion, Stephen Marshall stared at the screen, the words of Sparrow burning into his mind. Her defense of him, or rather, of the man she knew as Stephen. Marshall had struck him with the force of a physical blow. No one had defended him in over a decade. No one had looked past the monstrous caricature to suggest there might be a human being underneath. And this defense came from the one person whose opinion had, to his great surprise, begun to matter. More than any other, he was Veritas. The secret critic, the architect of his own public torment, was a persona he had created years ago. It was a twisted coping mechanism, a way to control the narrative by becoming his own worst enemy. He would create the attacks, then weather them, a masochistic cycle of self-loathing and punishment. The world's hatred was easier to bear when he was the one orchestrating it. This secret identity was his shield and his sword, his poison and his only antidote. But now, Elena, his Sparrow, his kind and brilliant helper, had held up a mirror, and for the first time, he didn't see the monster he had so carefully crafted. He saw the man she described, someone in pain, someone deserving of compassion. Her hopeful perspective, her unwavering belief in the possibility of good within him, was a light shining into the darkest corners of his soul. It was a heart-aching perspective that he had long forgotten was even possible. The rift between Veritas and Sparrow was a rift within himself. Her words challenged the very foundation of his bitter existence. Could he really continue this charade? Could he keep attacking the man that this incredible woman was beginning to see and perhaps even care for? The damage his anonymous persona was causing was suddenly not just an abstract concept, it was a direct wound to the one genuine, emotional connection he had managed to form in a decade of self-imposed exile. He read and reread their conversation. Her passionate defense of a man she believed was a stranger to her. It was the ultimate, unintentional vote of confidence. She wasn't defending a billionaire or a boss, she was defending a principle. The idea that everyone has a story and deserves a measure of grace. This act of pure, unprompted loyalty from Elena Watson was the catalyst for a profound internal shift. The first step towards a possible redemption. The persona of Veritas, once a source of bitter satisfaction, now felt like a heavy, suffocating costume. It had protected him, but it had also locked him in a prison of his own making. Elena's words were the key, showing him that there might be another way, a path not of overcoming the world's hatred, but of rejoining it. He looked at the screen, at her last message hanging in the air, and knew that the game had to change. The plot twist was no longer just about Elena's divided heart, it was about his own fractured soul. Life in the mansion continued with its new, softer rhythm. Stephen was more present, more open, often engaging Elena in quiet conversations about art, literature, and the world beyond his gates. It was during one of these conversations that the universe decided to pull the thread that would unravel everything. He was describing a particularly frustrating business negotiation, and in a moment of exasperation, he sighed and said, "It's like trying to nail jelly to a wall." A simple, common phrase perhaps, but it sent an electric jolt through Elena. Her blood ran cold. Trying to nail jelly to a wall. Veritas had used that exact, slightly unusual phrase in a private message to her just a week before, describing his frustration with a source who had backed out. It was his Sparrow's favorite of his many quips. Coincidence? Maybe, but for Elena Watson, a woman whose world had already been turned upside down, it felt like anything but. A tiny, terrifying seed of suspicion was planted in the fertile ground of her mind. She tried to dismiss it as a fluke, a silly notion. How could it be possible? The idea was ludicrous, a plot from a convoluted novel. Stephen Marshall, the silent, wounded Recluse King, and Veritas, the loud, aggressive secret critic. They were polar opposites. One was the victim, the other the tormentor. To even consider they could be the same person felt like a betrayal of all common sense. Yet, the phrase echoed in her head, a persistent whisper she couldn't ignore. Driven by this gnawing suspicion, she began to pay closer attention. She subtly steered their conversations towards topics Veritas had written about, listening for any overlap in opinion, any similarity in cadence or vocabulary. She wasn't a detective, just a simple helper, but her senses were on high alert. This wasn't just a mystery, it was deeply personal. The answer to this puzzle held the key to understanding the emotional chaos of the last few months and the truth of the two men she cared for. The clues were small, almost insignificant on their own, but together they began to form a chilling pattern, a shared love for a niche genre of classical music, a similar dry wit that would appear when Stephen's guard was down, a passing reference to a childhood memory that mirrored a story Veritas had once told her about himself. Each new piece of the puzzle made her heart beat faster, a mix of dread and horrified fascination. The secret identity she was unearthing felt too monumental, too world-shattering to be true. The suspicion grew from a whisper to a roar, a wild, unbelievable theory that refused to be silenced. Could the entire conflict, the public war that had defined her experience, be a lie? A one-man show? It was the kind of audacious plot twist that changes everything, recasting every conversation, every article, every shared moment in a new, disorienting light. She looked at the man across the library, the kind employer who was confiding in her. And a terrifying question formed in her mind: who are you? Really? The critic's latest article was particularly cruel. Veritas, in his infinite misguided wisdom, had written a piece mocking the reclusive billionaire's supposed lack of sentimentality. He claimed Stephen Marshall was so emotionally detached that he likely wouldn't even remember his own parents' anniversary, painting him as a man who had severed all emotional ties to his past. The article was baseless speculation, designed to hurt, and reading it, knowing what she suspected, filled Elena with a cold, determined anger. She decided to act. Not with words, not with online arguments, but with a quiet gesture of defiance. Her suspicion about his secret identity was a confusing storm in her head. But one thing was crystal clear: the man she worked for deserved kindness, not cruelty. She knew from her work organizing his private calendar that his parents' anniversary was in fact the next day. It was the perfect opportunity to prove the critic and perhaps the man behind the critic wrong. Without a word to anyone, Elena spent the evening in the mansion's greenhouse. She carefully selected his mother's favorite flowers, stargazer lily, and arranged them in a simple, elegant vase. She then found a framed photograph she had seen tucked away in a dusty corner of the library, a picture of a young, smiling Stephen with his parents. It was a simple, deeply personal tribute, a silent rebuttal to the public narrative of the heartless recluse king. The next morning, she placed the vase and the photograph on a small table in the solarium, his favorite place for morning coffee. She didn't wait for him to see it, she simply left it there, a quiet act of loyalty and faith. It was a heart-aching gesture, a message sent not to her boss, but to the man behind the curtain. It said, "I see you." Not the monster, not the critic, not the billionaire. The man. It was her move in this confusing, high-stakes chess game. This small act was her way of overcoming the confusion and hurt. It was a choice. Instead of confronting him with her terrifying suspicion, she chose to respond with compassion. It was a test of sorts, a gentle nudge to see how the real Stephen Marshall would react to an act of kindness that so directly contradicted the false narrative being spun about him. The potential for a surprise reaction, either good or bad, left her on edge all morning. She was taking a huge risk. This gesture could be misinterpreted, seen as overstepping her bounds as a helper. It could shatter the fragile trust he had placed in her. But in her heart, she knew it was the right thing to do. It was a direct challenge to the cynical world Veritas had created. A small but powerful statement that kindness could be a more potent weapon than criticism. Now, all she could do was wait and see if her message had been received. Stephen walked into the solarium, his mind preoccupied with the day's soulless tasks, and stopped dead. There, in the soft morning light, sat the ghost of his past, resurrected by a simple, profound gesture. The stargazer Lily, his mother's favorite. The photograph, a relic from a time before his world turned to ash. It wasn't a decoration, it was a memory, a piece of his soul that he thought was buried forever. In that moment, the armor of the Recluse King didn't just crack, it shattered. He knew instantly who was responsible. Only one person in this house, in this world, had the access, the insight, and the heart to do something so deeply personal. Elena. This gesture wasn't just kind, it was a direct, silent response to the vicious words he himself, as Veritas, had written the day before. She was showing him, not telling him, how wrong he was. The beautiful, terrible irony of it all struck him with overwhelming force. The woman by his side was actively healing the wounds he was secretly inflicting upon himself. A wave of shame so powerful, it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. The secret critic persona, once a shield, was now revealed for what it truly was: a destructive, childish indulgence. It wasn't just hurting a nameless, faceless billionaire, it was hurting him, and it was forcing this incredible woman to defend a man from his own self-hatred. He saw with blinding clarity the damage his double life was causing. The betrayal he was committing against her trust and his own chance at healing. Her act of kindness was more than just a thoughtful gesture, it was a mirror showing him the man he had become versus the man she believed he could be. She wasn't just a helper, she was his conscience, his moral compass. This heart-aching display of empathy made him realize the profound depth of her character. She possessed a quiet strength and an unwavering compassion that he hadn't seen in anyone, least of all himself. Her belief in him was a gift he knew he didn't deserve. This was the moment of reckoning, the point of no return. The game was over. He could no longer maintain the secret identity that was causing such pain and creating such lies between them. The path to redemption wasn't through anonymous attacks or self-flagellation. It was through truth, through vulnerability, through the terrifying act of letting someone in completely. Elena's simple act of kindness had shown him the way. The overcoming he needed to do was not of the world, but of himself. He stood there for a long time, staring at the flowers, the photograph, and the wreck of his own making. He knew what he had to do. It was the scariest thing he had ever contemplated, far more frightening than any market crash or hostile takeover. He had to destroy Veritas. And he had to confess everything to Elena, the one person who had seen the real Stephen Marshall all along. He walked slowly back to his study, his destiny finally clear. Later that evening, Elena's laptop pinged with a new message. It was from Veritas. Her heart leaped into her throat, a familiar mix of excitement and dread. After their argument and her subsequent silent treatment, she had no idea what to expect. The message was short, but it carried the weight of a final chapter. Sparrow, it began, the name now feeling bittersweet. You were right about everything. There's something I have to tell you, a confession I need to make. Please, meet me. The message was stripped of all his usual bravado and intellectual arrogance. The voice of the secret critic was gone, replaced by something more humbled, more human. He wasn't asking for a debate or a date, he was asking for a reckoning. He told her he would choose the location, a place that was significant, and that he would explain everything when he saw her. The request was no longer an invitation, but a summons, one that her soul knew she could not refuse. For Elena, this was it. The moment of truth. Her suspicion about his secret identity had reached a fever pitch. And this message felt like a confirmation of her wildest fears. a confession, a significant location. It all pointed to a revelation that would change everything. She was about to come face-to-face with the man who had captivated her mind, challenged her beliefs, and if she was right, had orchestrated the most elaborate, painful deception she could ever imagine. The ultimate plot twist was at hand. She agreed, her hands trembling as she typed the simple, "Okay." The storm of emotional conflict inside her was raging. Part of her was terrified to have her theory confirmed, to know that the man who had confided in her was also the one who had tormented himself so publicly. Another part of her felt a profound, aching sadness for the broken man who would go to such lengths. This wasn't just about a lie, it was about a wound so deep it had split a man in two. She thought about Stephen Marshall, the Recluse king, who had been quieter than usual all day, a thoughtful, heavy melancholy hanging about him. Was he preparing for this moment too? Was he getting ready to dismantle the prison he had so carefully constructed for himself? The meeting wasn't just about her and Veritas, it was about the final, desperate act in Stephen's long battle with himself, a final push for redemption that he knew he couldn't make alone. As she prepared to leave the mansion, she felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The confusion was gone, replaced by a quiet resolve. Whatever she was about to face, she would face it with the same compassion and strength she had shown all along. Her destiny had led her to this exact moment, to be a witness and perhaps a catalyst for the unmasking of two men who were really just one. She was no longer just a helper, she was a pivotal player in a deeply human drama. The location Veritas had chosen was a small secluded observatory on a hill overlooking the city. It was a place for looking at the stars, for seeking truth in the vast silent darkness. As Elena Watson made her way up the winding path, her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She was bracing herself to meet the charismatic, witty intellectual from her screen, the man whose words had built a home in her mind. The love story she had nurtured in secret was about to have its first, and perhaps last chapter in the real world. She reached the top and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The space was dark, save for the faint glow of city lights through the open domed roof. In the center of the room, silhouetted against the star-dusted sky, stood a single figure. Her eyes took a moment to adjust, her mind struggling to reconcile what she was seeing. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't the face she had imagined 1,000 times. It was Stephen Marshall, waiting for her, alone. The surprise was so profound, so absolute, that for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. Her wild suspicion, the theory she had barely allowed herself to believe, was true. The air crackled with the unspoken confession, the monumental truth that hung between them. The Recluse king, the man she had served and protected, and the secret critic, the man she had secretly adored and argued with, were one and the same. There was no one else coming. There never was. He turned to face her, and his eyes held a universe of pain, shame, and a desperate plea for understanding. The mask of the cold billionaire was gone. The mask of the arrogant critic was gone. All that was left was Stephen, raw and vulnerable, standing before her without any of his armor. This was the moment of the great unmasked truth, the culmination of every confusing sign and every conflicting emotion she had experienced since setting foot in his mansion. The silence stretched on, filled with the weight of 1,000 lies and one devastating truth. The entire narrative of her life for the past few months, good versus evil, the hero versus the villain, was a fiction he had written, and she had been his unwitting audience. The sense of betrayal was sharp and painful, a fresh wound that cut deeper than she could have expected, even though she had suspected it. Her digital confidant was a phantom. But as she looked at him, at the genuine anguish on his face, another feeling began to surface, pushing past the shock and the hurt, a deep, overwhelming wave of compassion. She finally understood the true depth of his loneliness and self-loathing. This wasn't a game played to deceive her, it was a desperate cry for help from a man who didn't know how to ask for it. The real plot twist wasn't that he was both men, it was that she was the only one who had made him want to stop being either. "It was me, Elena," Stephen said, his voice quiet but clear, echoing slightly in the vast open space of the observatory. "Veritas, it was always me." He finally confessed the whole twisted story, laying bare the secret identity he had forged from his own pain. The secret critic wasn't created to fool the world, but to punish himself, to control the narrative of his own damnation. It was a shield of self-loathing, a way to build walls so high that no one could ever get close enough to hurt him again. He explained that her arrival was a variable he never anticipated. Her quiet competence, her unwavering kindness, her refusal to see him as the monster he believed himself. Tabate all began to dismantle his bitter creation from the inside out. He admitted that their online conversations, his connection with Sparrow, became the only honest part of his life, even though it was built on a foundation of deceit. It was a heart-aching and tragic confession of a man at war with himself. The ultimate irony, he told her, was that he, as Stephen, began to rely on her strength, while as Veritas, he fell for her mind and spirit. Her fierce defense of him in their chat had been the final blow. "You believed in a man I was actively trying to destroy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your faith in me, a stranger you thought I was, gave me the courage to face the man I actually am." Her kindness was the catalyst for his desire for redemption. He stepped closer, his eyes pleading with her to understand. "I'm done hiding," he declared. Not with arrogance, but with the fragile strength of a man making the most difficult decision of his life. "I'm ready to face the world, to answer for the lies, and to try and heal." This was his moment of true overcoming, not of his critics, but of his own demons. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he couldn't do it alone. The journey ahead was too terrifying to face from inside his prison. Then he laid his heart completely at her feet. "I'm not asking you to be my helper anymore, Elena. I'm asking you to stand with me, as my partner, as my equal, as the person who saw me when I couldn't even see myself." It wasn't a plea for forgiveness, but an invitation to a new beginning, a future built on the rubble of his past. It was the climax of their unlikely love story, born from a plot twist that was in the end all about the search for truth. He stood before her, completely unmasked, no longer a king, a critic, or a billionaire, but just a man. A man offering her the broken, hopeful pieces of his heart, and asking if she would help him put them back together. Her choice now would not just define her own future, but his as well. It was a decision that would determine if this was the end of a strange and painful chapter, or the true beginning of their shared destiny. And so, our story comes to a close. We've walked a winding path through the halls of a silent mansion and the hidden corridors of the human heart. We witnessed a man, the Recluse king, who built a prison of loneliness and self-hatred, and the woman, his unassuming helper, who held up a mirror and showed him a path to redemption. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? A reminder that the loudest critics, both in the world and inside our own heads, are often just voices crying out from a place of deep pain. The journey of Stephen and Elena is a testament to the idea that compassion is the only real antidote to cynicism. Their story began with a shocking plot twist built on a secret identity, but it ended with a simple, profound truth: we are all more than the worst thing we've ever done, and we are all more than the labels the world assigns to us. It shows that true overcoming isn't about conquering the world, but about having the courage to face ourselves. The final scene, where he stands before her, completely unmasked, is a powerful symbol of what can happen when we finally choose vulnerability over fear and connection over isolation. It's a truly heart-aching conclusion to a story about finding love in the most broken of places. Now we want to hear from you, the heart and soul of this community. This is where the story continues. If this journey resonated with you, please take a moment to like the video. It truly helps us more than you know. And we'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What was the one moment in this story that impacted you the most? Was it a small gesture of kindness, the big reveal, or the final confession? Tell us, did you expect this ending, or were you hoping for a different outcome for Elena and Stephen? We read every single comment and cherish your insights. If you believe in the power of stories that dig deep and touch the soul, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you're always the first to know when a new chapter begins. Don't let the journey end here. We have a whole library of videos just like this one, filled with emotion and surprise, so be sure to check out some of our older content after this. Thank you for spending your time with us today, and we can't wait to see you in the next story.